The day my daughter said, "Mom, you're old. Your place is at home, watching TV and resting." I didn't cry, didn't yell. I just smiled. Because I knew that in just a few hours, they would finally understand who had truly kept this family standing all these years. My name is Angela Moore. I'm 67 years old, and I used to work as an administrative officer for the Oregon state government. I started that job when I was 35 and stayed there for more than 3 decades, until I retired at 62. I've always been meticulous, responsible, and believed that respect should come naturally, especially within a family. I live alone in Portland, in the small house I bought after my husband David passed away in a work accident when I was 53. Losing the love of my life was devastating, but the insurance payout from his company allowed me to pay off the mortgage and still have some savings left. Along with his pension and my own government retirement, I built a stability I'd never imagined before. I have one daughter, Rachel, who is 44. She's married to Mark, 47, a manager at a transportation company in Seattle. They have 2 kids, Ethan, 17, and Lily, 15, my beloved grandchildren. After retiring, my finances grew even steadier. I always believed we were a close, loving family. Since the day my husband died, I've poured all my love, time, and energy into Rachel and the kids. I paid Rachel's private college tuition, funded her wedding, and helped with the down payment on their house. When my grandkids were born, I felt as if life had given me a second chance, but maybe I trusted that love too much. In recent years, I've started to feel the change. Rachel began treating me like a burden. Mark, once polite, now jokes about my age. And my grandkids, who used to run into my arms, have grown distant and cold. I've always been the one paying for every family vacation. Each year, I'd choose the destination, buy the plane tickets, book the hotels, and plan the itinerary. All they had to do was enjoy it. At first, I thought it was how I showed love, but over time, I realized I'd become just the sponsor, not a part of the family. The breaking point came when they planned a summer trip to Florida, a place I'd always dreamed of visiting. I researched resorts in Miami, compared prices, and felt so excited imagining days by the ocean. Rachel came over to discuss plans, and I happily showed her my choices. Then she said something that shattered me. "Mom, you're getting harder to travel with. You complain a lot during trips, it embarrasses the kids." Mark, sitting beside her, laughed and said, "Must be age, Mom. You'd be better off relaxing at home." My 2 grandkids, sitting in the living room, laughed along as if it were a harmless joke. I sat there in silence, my throat tight, fighting back tears. I gently told them that I only wanted to spend more time together, but Rachel kept going. She said I took too long to get ready, got tired easily, and made them adjust their plans around me. Mark added, "Every trip, Mom, you complain about the heat, the food, the noise. It's exhausting." That night, after they left, I sat for hours on the couch, tears rolling down my face. I asked myself if I truly had become a burden. Was I being selfish for wanting to go, even though I was the one paying for everything? I tried to change, to move faster, talk less, complain less, but nothing changed. Rachel's annoyed look stayed. Mark kept his jokes, and the kids barely spoke to me anymore. Then came that morning, the day they were leaving for the trip, the day that changed everything. I woke up at 5 a.m., packed my suitcase, arranged my medication and documents, carefully picked my clothes. My heart was nervous, uneasy. At 8 a.m., the doorbell rang. Rachel stood there, her face stern. Without greeting me, she went straight to the point. "Mom, we talked it over. You shouldn't come. We want a relaxed trip. No worries. Ethan and Lily are at an age where they need freedom." It felt like the floor vanished beneath my feet. I asked quietly. Did I do something wrong? Is this because of what you said last time? Rachel sighed, avoiding my eyes. It's not about anything specific, Mom. It's just older people should rest at home, watch TV. Traveling is tiring. At that moment, Mark walked in, catching the end of the conversation. He chuckled. I think you'll enjoy it more here, Mom. You can order takeout, watch Netflix, and we'll send you pictures from the trip. Ethan and Lily appeared behind him. Ethan said, It's better this way, Grandma. The trips are more fun when it's just us. Lily laughed and added, At least we can do the adventurous stuff without hearing that's too dangerous. Every time. I sat there in silence, looking at the 4 people I loved. More than anything, the ones I had spent my whole life caring for. Every dollar saved, every spare moment devoted to them. And now, they were cutting me out of the very vacation I had paid for, and they could still laugh while doing it. Rachel said the taxi was waiting and told me not to worry, that they would take care of everything. Mark grabbed the suitcases and walked out the door. My 2 grandchildren kissed me lightly on the cheek, a half-hearted goodbye. A sharp pain rose in my chest, not from being left behind, but from realizing that, to my own family, I had become unnecessary. But a few minutes later, something inside me shifted. That pain turned into something else, not anger, not sadness, but a cold, clear sense of awareness I hadn't felt in years. I looked at the clock. It was 9:15 a.m. Their flight was at 11:30. I stood up, walked to the kitchen, and made myself a grassed, strong cup of coffee, thick and bold, just the way I liked it. As I sat at the kitchen table, I began to think with a calmness that even surprised me. And at that moment, I understood everything. I was not the problem. I had never been the problem. The problem was that I had allowed them to treat me as if I were a burden they had to put up with, when in reality, it was the opposite. I was the one who had supported that family, both financially and emotionally. After finishing my coffee, I picked up my phone. By then, they were probably at the airport, checking in. I smiled for the first time that morning because I knew that in just a few hours, they would finally understand who had truly held that family together. I sat in my armchair in the living room, looking out at the backyard garden, and began reflecting on everything that had brought me to this day. It's strange how people only see the truth when the pain becomes unbearable. I've always been the person who avoids conflict, choosing silence to keep the peace. Maybe that's why it took me so long to realize that the people I loved most were walking all over me. After David passed away, I poured my entire heart into being a mother and grandmother, as if I could make up for his absence by becoming 2 people at once. Back then, Rachel was 25, already an adult, but I still treated her like a child who needed protection emotionally and financially. When Rachel graduated from college, I threw her a big celebration. I rented a hall, ordered catering, and invited family and friends. Rachel beamed with happiness, and I felt fulfilled knowing I could give her that joy. Not long after, Mark entered her life. From the beginning, I didn't feel right about him. Something told me he cared more about our family's money than about my daughter. But Rachel was in love, and I didn't want to be the overbearing mother who ruined things. When they decided to get married, I didn't just pay for the entire wedding. I also helped with the down payment on their first home. Mark even thanked me back then, saying I was the best mother-in-law in the world. Ironic, isn't it? The first years of their marriage passed peacefully. Rachel worked as a secretary at an accounting firm, and Mark was a manager at a transportation company. They visited me every weekend for lunch, talking and laughing. I felt needed, like I truly mattered in their lives. When Ethan was born, I was overjoyed, my first grandchild. I spent months buying baby clothes, toys, and furniture for his room. Rachel used to joke that I was more excited than she was, and she was right. I gladly took care of him so she could return to work without worry. Since Rachel wanted to go back to the office early, I became, in practice, a full-time babysitter, unpaid, of course. Every morning, I'd pick Ethan up, take care of him all day, and return him home by evening. Rachel and Mark could work peacefully, knowing their child was safe and loved. When Lily was born, I was 59, still healthy and full of energy. I adored both grandchildren with all my heart. I took them to doctor's appointments, school events, and weekend park trips. I was the one buying their clothes, school supplies, and birthday gifts. Rachel and Mark got used to it. I didn't realize I was making things too easy for them. They had children without shouldering much of the financial or caregiving responsibility. I carried it all, thinking it was what a good mother and grandmother should do. Family vacations started when Ethan was 4. Rachel said she wanted her kids to see the world, to have experiences. Since I was in a better financial position, I offered to pay for everything. Our first trip was to Cannon Beach, Oregon. We stayed at a lovely hotel, and the kids loved it. From then on, it became a family tradition. One new trip every year, always planned and paid for by me. As time went on, the destinations grew farther and more expensive, from California to Hawaii, then New York. Rachel would say, "Yes, kids deserve to see beautiful places." And I believed her completely. I enjoyed traveling too. After decades of hard work, it felt good to get away and see the world. But little by little, I began to realize that my role in those trips was no longer to enjoy them. I was just the one footing the bill. Rachel and Mark always picked the restaurants, the schedules, the hotels, everything. And me? I was just the one who paid. When my grandchildren entered their teenage years, everything got worse. They started feeling embarrassed by me. If I walked too slowly, they sighed. If I couldn't hear well and asked them to repeat, they rolled their eyes. If I wanted to sit and rest, they grew impatient. Rachel began making caring but sarcastic remarks about my age, saying I was getting weaker, that I should take better care of myself. Mark laughed when I tripped over a tree root during a walk and said I was losing balance because I'm old. I laughed along, pretending it didn't bother me. But inside, something cracked. What hurt the most wasn't their words, it was how much my grandchildren had changed. Ethan, the boy who once told me every little story from school, now barely gave short answers. Lily, who used to cling to me constantly, had become cold and distant. I tried to make up for it by being more generous, buying expensive gifts, giving them pocket money, paying for classes and extracurriculars. I thought that if I was useful enough, they'd love me again like before. But I was wrong. Mark grew more comfortable mocking me. He'd say I was forgetful, always repeating the same old stories. Rachel would laugh loudly and say it was normal for old age, that I was becoming a real grandma. And the worst part, they said those things right in front of their kids, as if humiliating an older person was normal. I started doubting myself. Was I really becoming forgetful? Was I truly that annoying? I began watching every word, every gesture, trying to be perfect just to avoid criticism. But it was useless. There was always something wrong with me. If I talked too much, I was annoying. If I talked too little, I was cold. If I took too long to get ready, they complained. If I moved quickly, they said I was careless. If I wanted to eat at my favorite restaurant, they didn't want to. If I refused their choice, I was difficult. And worst of all, I was still the one paying for everything. The vacations, the gifts, the extras. They could insult me, belittle me, but when the check came, They had no problem letting me pull out my card and pay. Mrs. Helen, my neighbor, sometimes warned me, Angela, decent families don't treat their elders like that. You're being taken advantage of. But I always defended Rachel and Mark. I said they were good people, just worried about me. Now, sitting in my armchair with my phone in hand, I finally saw the truth clearly. I wasn't family to them anymore. I was just a source of money, someone convenient, ready to fix any financial issue, yet considered a burden when I had nothing more to give. I looked at the clock on the wall, took a deep breath, and unlocked my phone. There were calls to make, changes to set in motion, because that morning I had finally understood one thing. Respect doesn't come from being agreeable, it comes from being irreplaceable. And I was about to show them just how irreplaceable I really was. The first call was to Wells Fargo Bank. My voice was steady, firm as if I'd been preparing for this moment all along. I asked to speak with Mr. Martin, the account manager I'd had for over 10 years. He knew me well, cautious, reliable. I told him I needed to immediately cancel all secondary cards under my daughter's and son-in-law's names. Mr. Martin asked if something had happened, if the cards were lost or stolen. I replied, "No, it's just a personal decision. I'm done paying for them." He said the process would be completed right away. Within minutes, the cards would be frozen. I also canceled the automatic monthly transfer $1,000 I had been sending to Rachel's account to help with household expenses. He noted everything and confirmed that from now on, all transactions would stop. Then I called the credit card company. I canceled Mark's secondary card, the one he used for gas and lunches. The agent asked if I wanted the user to be notified. I said, "No need. I'll do that myself." The next call was to the hotel in Miami Beach. My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed calm. I told the receptionist that, for personal reasons, I needed to cancel the reservation under my name. She said since it was a non-refundable booking, I'd lose one night's fee but get the rest refunded. I didn't care. That amount, to me, was an investment in my dignity. I asked her to make sure the cancellation was noted, and that if anyone showed up with my information, they were not to be allowed to check in. Next, I called the travel agency in Florida that had arranged the family tours. I canceled everything: the city tour, the boat trip, the snorkeling session, and the special beach dinner. Each cancellation felt like breaking one more invisible chain that had kept me tied to that humiliation. The travel agent seemed surprised that I was canceling so many services at once. She asked if I wanted to reschedule. I said no. I wouldn't need those services anymore. She mentioned that some tours had cancellation fees. I agreed immediately, without hesitation. Then came the American Airlines call, the most complicated one, because it was for 4 plane tickets I had booked. I explained that for health reasons, I wouldn't be able to travel and wanted to cancel all tickets. The agent told me they were promotional, non-refundable fares, but I could transfer them or change the dates. I said I didn't want to transfer or reschedule, I just wanted to cancel them. She reminded me I'd lose the full amount, over $1,500, and I confirmed that I understood, but I wanted to proceed anyway. As I made those calls, I felt something strange. Not anger, not sadness. It was as if I had finally woken up from a long sleep and could see everything clearly. Each cancellation was one more step toward freedom from dependence. I also called the travel insurance company, canceled the entire policy. Then I called the car rental company in Miami, canceled the reservation. Finally, I called the restaurant where I had booked a table for Lily's birthday dinner and canceled that too. When I finished all the calls, the clock showed it was nearly 11 a.m. I guess they were at the boarding gate by then, confident, excited, completely unaware of what was coming. I made myself another cup of coffee and sat on the balcony, watching the city below. Then the phone rang. It was Rachel. I answered, my voice calm, almost serene. She was nearly shouting, saying their cards weren't working. I replied gently that there was no error. I had personally canceled everything. Rachel went silent for a few seconds, as if she didn't understand, then exploded, asking how I could do such a thing, if I'd lost my mind, if I realized I was ruining the kids' vacation. I told her that I wasn't the one ruining the vacation, they were. They were the ones who said old people should stay home, that I wasn't welcome. I was simply respecting their wish to travel without me. And now, without my money. Mark grabbed the phone, shouting that I was being vindictive, that the kids weren't to blame, that I was being cruel to my own family. I took a deep breath and said that real cruelty was when people humiliate a 67-year-old woman in front of everyone when they exclude her from a trip she paid for herself. Rachel spoke again, this time her tone pleading. She said we could all sit down and talk, that maybe they'd gone too far, that I could still come. They'd wait for me at the airport, that everything could be fixed. I laughed, a kind of laugh I couldn't remember making in years. I said it was funny how quickly their attitude changed whenever money was mentioned. When I was just an annoying old lady, they were ready to leave me behind. But when I became an annoying old lady with money, suddenly, I was important again. Ethan took the phone, his voice trembling, saying I was being unfair, that he hadn't done anything wrong. Those words pierced my heart, because I truly loved my grandchildren. But I told him that sometimes people need to learn respect and take responsibility for their actions. I wasn't punishing anyone. I was teaching them a lesson. I hung up and switched my phone to silent mode. They called back at least 15 times, but I didn't answer. I sat out on the balcony, sipping my coffee, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my own life. Around 2 p.m., Mrs. Helen, my neighbor, knocked on my door. She said she'd seen some strangers downstairs asking about me. I told her everything, and she was furious at how my family had treated me. She said I'd done the right thing, that at my age, a person deserves respect, not humiliation, and that a real family would never treat an elder as a burden. We talked the entire afternoon, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly understood. By sunset, I knew they must have returned humiliated, out of money, forced to explain to everyone at the airport why they couldn't board the plane, and I didn't feel sorry for them at all. I just felt that justice had finally been done. The next morning, I woke up with a feeling I hadn't known in years. Peace. I prepared breakfast slowly, played some soft jazz I loved, and opened the windows wide to let the sunlight flood in. For the first time in years, the house truly felt like it was mine. Around 9 a.m., the doorbell rang over and over. It was Rachel, eyes red, face torn between anger and desperation. She walked in without asking and said bluntly that they'd had to borrow money from Mark's parents to pay for a taxi home from the airport, and that it had been humiliating to explain what had happened. I offered her coffee as usual, but she waved it off, her tone sharp. She said she wasn't there to chat, she was there to fix the insane situation I had created. She claimed Ethan and Lily were emotionally hurt, that Mark was furious, and that everything was out of control. I sat down in the armchair in the living room and told her to sit and talk. But Rachel refused, pacing back and forth, gesturing angrily. I began explaining calmly that I hadn't created any situation. I had simply responded to the one they had caused when they excluded me from the trip. Rachel tried to downplay it. She said it was all a misunderstanding, that they'd been stressed from trip preparations, that maybe they'd said too much, that I was overreacting, turning a small issue into a family tragedy. At that moment, I realized she still didn't understand anything. She still thought she could smooth everything over with a few half-hearted apologies, that I would once again swallow my pride to keep the peace. But something fundamental had changed in me, and there was no going back. I stood up from my chair and walked straight to the bedroom. I opened the drawer where I kept important documents and took out a folder Rachel had never seen before. It was the will I had written 5 years earlier, back when I still believed I was leaving my legacy to a loving family. I walked back to the living room and handed it to Rachel. She frowned, not yet understanding what I meant. I explained that in this will, she was to inherit everything the house in Portland, the savings, the investments, everything I had worked my entire life to build. Rachel's eyes lit up for a moment, but quickly turned to confusion when I said that the document was no longer valid, that on Monday morning, I would meet with attorney David Miller to create an entirely new will. Rachel's eyes widened as she asked if I was really threatening to take away her inheritance just because of one vacation. I replied, "It's not because of one vacation. It's because of years of being disrespected, humiliated, treated like an ATM instead of being treated as a mother and grandmother." Rachel tried to argue that I was overreacting, that every family has conflicts, that I couldn't throw away years of family bonds over something small. But my decision was made, and nothing could change it. I picked up my phone and called David. Even though it was Saturday morning, he answered. He had always been considerate with me. I scheduled the meeting for Monday morning, speaking clearly right in front of Rachel so she would know I was absolutely serious. While I spoke on the phone, I saw Rachel starting to panic. She gestured for me to stop, whispering that we could sit down and talk. But I kept talking to the attorney, confirming the appointment and making it clear that I wanted to rewrite the entire will. When I hung up, Rachel's face went pale. She sank into a chair, her voice trembling as she asked if I was really going to take away her inheritance. I replied, "Not going to, I already have. Those who don't respect me while I'm alive don't deserve anything after I'm gone." Just then, Mark walked in with the two kids. He tried to stay calm in front of them, though his face was full of anger. Ethan and Lily greeted me shyly, clearly still uneasy after everything that had happened. Mark said we needed an adult conversation, that this was affecting the whole family, that the kids couldn't sleep, were upset, and that I was being selfish, thinking only of myself. I looked at my grandchildren, my heart aching. They looked so sad, so lost, but I knew this was necessary. If I gave in now, everything would go back to the way it was, and I would lose my self-respect forever. I sat beside Ethan and Lily, held their hands, and said as gently as I could, "Sometimes adults make mistakes, and when that happens, there have to be consequences. I'm not angry at you, but you need to understand that respecting your elders is not optional. It's essential." Ethan stayed silent, but I saw tears running down his face. My heart broke, but I knew I had to stay firm, because if I didn't, I would lose their respect forever. Mark changed his tone, saying he realized they had been wrong, that they were ready to apologize, that we could start over, but that cutting them out of the will was too extreme, that I was punishing the kids for the adults' mistakes. I said I wasn't punishing anyone. I was simply redirecting my assets toward something more deserving charities that help abandoned seniors. I told them that maybe my money would have real meaning there, instead of sitting in the hands of people who saw me as a burden. At that, Rachel finally lost her temper. She shouted that I was using money to manipulate everyone, that a mother shouldn't behave this way, that I was destroying the family out of pride, that I was petty and vengeful. I stood up, looked her straight in the eyes, and said, "You're right about one thing. I've become a different kind of mother. A mother who values herself, and who will no longer allow anyone to trample her in the name of family." Right then, Mrs. Helen rang the doorbell. I had asked her to come by at that time, knowing I might need a bit of moral support. When I opened the door, she walked in with a tray of butter cookies, greeting everyone with her usual polite grace. But I noticed her eyes scanning the room carefully. She knew my family well, knew how they had treated me, and her presence felt like a silent witness to my awakening. Mark tried to stay composed in front of Mrs. Helen, but I could see his discomfort. Rachel seemed uneasy too, knowing that Mrs. Helen was highly respected in the neighborhood and that any loud argument would quickly become the talk of the block. Mrs. Helen offered cookies to the kids, smiling and calling them polite and sweet. Then she turned to me and said, I looked radiant, like someone who had finally rested and found peace. That simple comment was enough for me to know she fully supported the changes I was making in my life. When she left, the tension in the room returned, but this time, something had shifted. Mark and Rachel seemed to realize I was no longer alone, that I had someone on my side, someone witnessing how they treated me. And right then, I made my final decision. I told them they had until Monday to think about everything, to decide whether they wanted a respectful relationship with me or preferred to keep seeing me as a walking bank. My decision about the will would depend on their wonk. Answer. When Monday came, I was already sitting in the waiting area of attorney David Miller's office early in the morning. I had slept well the night before. Even though Rachel had called me 3 times trying to negotiate, I didn't answer a single call because I knew that rushed apologies don't change anything. David greeted me with his usual professionalism, though I could sense the curiosity in his eyes. I told him everything in detail, not dramatically, just the truth. He listened quietly, took notes, then said I was making a brave and necessary decision. The new will was drafted right there. I left the house in Portland to Mrs. Helen, the woman who had always treated me like real family. My savings and investments were divided among 3 organizations: a retirement home I once visited, a center supporting abandoned seniors, and a legal fund protecting the rights of vulnerable elderly people. For Ethan and Lily, I created an education trust, accessible only when they turn 25 on the condition that they're in college and show respect and responsibility. It was my way of still caring for them, without letting their parents benefit. As for Rachel, I left her only a small sum and a few old pieces of my mother's jewelry. Not much, but a reminder that, no matter what, she's still my daughter. Mark, however, got nothing. He's not my blood, and he played the biggest role in the lack of respect I endured. David asked if I was absolutely sure about my decision. I smiled and said I had never been more certain of anything in my life. I signed all the papers and left the office, feeling like I had just closed an old chapter of my life. When I returned home, Rachel was waiting in the lobby. She looked restless, hands clenched, eyes constantly checking the clock. The moment she saw me, she rushed over and asked. I answered briefly, "Yes, everything's been taken care of." She asked again, her voice anxious, whether I had changed my mind, whether we could sit down and talk about the will. I said plainly, "There's nothing to talk about. All the decisions have been made and they won't change." We sat at the kitchen table, and I could tell she had prepared a little speech. Rachel started with an apology, saying she realized her mistakes, that they were truly sorry. I listened without interrupting, taking small sips of coffee. When she finished, I said I accepted her apology, but apologies can't erase years of being disrespected. I told her people don't change overnight, just because they suddenly realize the consequences. Rachel argued that every family has ups and downs, that everyone makes mistakes, that I couldn't give up on them just because of one bad period. I replied, "I'm not giving up on anyone. I'm simply setting clear boundaries and real consequences for your actions." Then I handed her a copy of the new will. I watched as her face slowly drained of color while reading each line that Mrs. Helen would inherit the house, that the charities would receive most of the estate, that she would only get a small sum and some jewelry, and that Ethan and Lily would only have access to their education trust in the future, Rachel asked, in a trembling voice. Mom, did you really do this? Or is this just your way of teaching us a lesson? I looked straight into her eyes and said, This isn't a lesson, and it's not a threat, it's reality. I've been too generous for too many years, and that generosity was mistaken for weakness. Now you'll finally learn what it means to live without depending on my money. I could tell he had carefully prepared for this meeting. He looked composed, spoke politely, trying to appear respectful. He greeted me, asked about my health, and even complimented my apartment, calling it warm and elegant. The change was far too sudden, but I wasn't fooled. He said he had done a lot of thinking, realized his mistakes, and wanted a chance to rebuild our relationship. He claimed he respected my decision about the will, but hoped to prove they could become a better family. Ethan and Lily came closer to me. Lily said that after talking to a classmate whose grandparents lived far away, she realized how lucky she was to have me nearby. Ethan said he wanted to know more about my life, about my years working for the state government, about what it felt like to dedicate a lifetime to public service. Their words moved me deeply, but I stayed calm. I said I was glad they were beginning to understand the real value of family, but that words were easy, actions were what mattered, and I wanted to see real change in the coming months. Rachel asked what she could do to regain my trust. I replied that it wasn't something that could be achieved in one conversation. It had to be built day by day, through actions born from genuine respect and love. Mark then asked if there was any chance I might reconsider the will in the future. I said everything in life can change if people truly change. But I wouldn't say what I expected, because any change must come naturally, not out of quote, calculation. In the months that followed, I began to see real differences in the family. Rachel started visiting more often, not just when she needed something. Mark stopped making sarcastic remarks about my age. The kids showed genuine interest in my life and stories. Although touched, I stayed cautious, watching to see if this remorse was real or just another act driven by money. Over time, I began to notice sincere signs of change, especially from the grandchildren. A few months later, Rachel came over for a serious talk. She said that regardless of the will, this time had made her reflect. She realized how selfish and ungrateful she had become. And now, she wanted to change, not for money, but to be a better person. Mark also showed real transformation. He began including me in family decisions, asking for my opinions on important matters, and treating me as a respected elder, not a burden. But what touched me most were the kids. Ethan started visiting me alone, just to talk. Lily called me every day, sharing about school and friends. They showed affection in a way that was natural and sincere. Still, I kept the will exactly as it was, not out of anger or revenge, but because I had learned something important. My worth doesn't lie in the money I leave behind, but in the dignity I preserve. Mrs. Helen remained my closest friend. She knew about the will and felt honored, but she always said, I just hope you live long enough to enjoy this house yourself. We often talked about how important it is for older people to value themselves, to never accept disrespect from anyone. Months after everything that happened, I found myself happier than ever. My relationship with the family had finally reached balance, built on respect, not financial dependence. They visited me because they wanted to, not because they needed to. I learned that it's never too late to teach others about respect, even if it takes firm actions. Dignity is not something to beg for or negotiate. It's something you protect with resolve. And sometimes, to save a family, you must be willing to risk losing it. Today, at 68, I can say I am a complete woman. No longer the one who gives everything just to be loved, but the one who loves herself enough to demand the respect she deserves. That is the greatest legacy I can leave behind, proof that age does not mean submission, and it's never too late to reclaim your dignity. This is a fictional story inspired by real experiences, with names and places changed to respect privacy. Though it carries Angela's unique voice, it reflects a universal truth many parents know: when love is misunderstood and kindness taken for granted. Perhaps each of us has faced that choice: to stay silent for peace or to speak up for dignity. There's no single right answer, only the path that brings peace to your heart. Angela chose to speak up, and in doing so, she found her true worth. I believe God blesses those who live with honesty and self-respect in love. Thank you for watching until the end. Stay with us and choose one of the two videos on screen to continue this emotional journey.